My name is Laura Mitchell. I'm 39 years old, a mother of two, living in a quiet suburb of Dallas, Texas. From the outside, my life seemed perfect. Stable career, loving family, and a comfortable home. But what many didn't know, not even those closest to me, was that I had drifted far from the faith I was raised in. I believed in God, but my faith had become lukewarm, a background element in a life consumed by daily distractions. That all changed one fateful night when I suffered a sudden heart attack. I collapsed in my kitchen, and in those moments when my heart stopped beating, I had an experience that would change me forever. I met Jesus, and he showed me the consequences of living a life divided, of claiming to believe, but not fully committing to his truth. What I saw was not just a warning for me, but for everyone who has let their faith become an afterthought. Jesus showed me a place where people who once knew him but turned away were left in separation, unable to feel his presence. But he also gave me a message of hope, a reminder that it's never too late to turn back to him. Stay with me, because what I'm about to share may change the way you see your own life. It's not just a story. It's a wake-up call from Jesus himself. Before that night, I lived what most people would call a normal life. I worked as an office manager for a small business in Dallas, Texas. My days were filled with meetings, emails, and endless to-do lists. After work, I'd rush home to prepare dinner, help my two kids, Emma and Jacob, with their homework, and maybe squeeze in some time to watch a TV show with my husband, Mark. It was a routine that felt productive, even fulfilling in some ways, but deep down, I knew something was missing. Growing up, my parents were devout Christians. We attended church every Sunday, prayed together as a family, and often discussed God's teachings around the dinner table. But as I got older, life became busier, and faith became less of a priority. I still believed in God, of course. I prayed when things got tough and thanked him when life was good. But the passion, the connection I once felt, it had faded. I told myself it was enough. God understands, I'd think. He knows I'm busy. He knows my heart. It was an excuse I repeated so often that I started to believe it. I'd occasionally go to church on holidays or when a friend invited me, but my Bible sat untouched on a shelf, collecting dust. My prayers became quick, almost mechanical, just another task to check off my list. I wasn't rejecting God outright. I just wasn't prioritizing him. Looking back now, I see how many small choices led me further and further away from him. A decision to skip church one Sunday turned into months, then years. Choosing convenience over conviction became a habit. I wasn't intentionally turning my back on God, but I wasn't walking toward him either. I was stuck in the middle, lukewarm. The day of the heart attack was like any other. I had just come home from work, exhausted from a long day, and was preparing dinner. Emma and Jacob were in the living room arguing over what movie to watch, and Mark hadn't made it home yet. I remember feeling a sharp pain in my chest, like nothing I'd ever experienced before. At first, I thought it was just stress, or maybe indigestion. But within seconds, the pain became unbearable. My vision blurred, and I felt my legs give out beneath me. As I lay there on the kitchen floor, gasping for air, I could faintly hear Emma calling out for help. Then everything went silent. The pain, the noise, the chaos. It all disappeared. And in that silence, something extraordinary happened. When everything went silent, I expected that to be the end. But instead of darkness, I found myself surrounded by a soft, radiant light. It wasn't blinding or harsh. It was warm, comforting, and alive. For the first time in what felt like years, I wasn't thinking about work, stress, or the next task on my list. All of that melted away, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I looked around, trying to make sense of where I was, when I noticed a figure approaching me. As it drew closer, I knew instantly who it was. There was no mistaking his presence. It was Jesus. His face radiated love, but his eyes were filled with a deep, piercing truth. It was as if he could see every part of me, every thought, every choice, every moment I had lived. I felt completely exposed, yet completely safe in his presence. I fell to my knees, overcome by his holiness. "Lord," I whispered, my voice trembling, "I don't understand. Why am I here?" Jesus didn't speak with words, but I understood him perfectly. His voice resonated within me, a mixture of love and sorrow. "Laura," he said, "you are here because you have strayed from the path I set before you. You believe in me, but you are not living for me. You have allowed the distractions of this world to pull you away from the truth." His words struck me like lightning. I had always thought that believing in God was enough, that as long as I wasn't doing anything bad, I was fine. But standing there before him, I realized how far I had drifted. I hadn't been rejecting him outright, but I wasn't truly following him either. I had been lukewarm, comfortable, complacent, and spiritually asleep. Jesus extended his hand, and as I took it, the scene around us changed. Suddenly, I was in a place that felt heavy, oppressive. It wasn't hell, there was no fire, no torment, but it was empty, desolate, and filled with a suffocating sense of separation. I saw people wandering aimlessly, their faces etched with regret and sorrow. They weren't screaming or in pain, but their anguish was palpable. They looked lost, as if they were searching for something they couldn't find. "Who are they?" I asked, my heart breaking for them. Jesus looked at me, his expression both tender and grave. "These are the ones who knew me but chose to live for themselves. They believed in me, but their faith was empty. They ignored my call, made small compromises, and let their hearts grow cold. They are not here because I abandoned them. They are here because they chose to live apart from me." Tears streamed down my face as I watched them. I could feel their emptiness, their longing for the presence of God, but it was just out of reach. "Is there no hope for them?" I asked. "There is always hope," Jesus said, his voice filled with compassion. "But the time to choose is now. Once this life ends, the choices you make are final." He then showed me glimpses of my own life, moments where I had chosen convenience over conviction, where I had ignored his voice calling me back to him. I saw myself skipping church because I was too tired, neglecting prayer because I was too busy, and brushing off opportunities to share his love with others. Each decision seemed small at the time, but together, they painted a picture of a life that was drifting further and further from him. "But I still believed in you," I said, my voice trembling. "I prayed. I tried to be a good person." "Belief is not enough," Jesus replied gently. "Even the demons believe and tremble. What I desire is your heart, your trust, your willingness to follow me completely. Lukewarm faith does not reflect my light. It leads to separation." His words pierced through every excuse I had ever made. For the first time I understood what it meant to truly follow him, not just to believe, but to live a life surrendered to his will. It wasn't about being perfect. It was about being devoted, about making him the center of everything. The scene around us shifted again, and I was back in the radiant light of his presence. Jesus looked at me with eyes filled with both love and urgency. "Laura," he said, "you still have time. Return to me and tell others what you have seen. Many are spiritually asleep just as you were. Help them wake up before it is too late." I wanted to stay in his presence forever, but I knew what he was asking of me. "I will, Lord," I said, my voice trembling. "I will share what you've shown me." As soon as I spoke those words, the light around me began to fade. I felt myself being pulled back, my body heavy and grounded once more. With a gasp, I opened my eyes. When I opened my eyes, I was back in the hospital. The sterile smell of antiseptics, the hum of machines, and the faint sound of monitors beeping brought me back to reality. My chest ached, and my body felt heavy, but my mind was consumed by what I had just experienced. I couldn't stop thinking about the vision, the place of separation, the wandering souls, and the words Jesus had spoken to me. It wasn't just a warning for me. It was a call to action. As I lay in that hospital bed, memories of what Jesus had shown me played over and over in my mind. I thought about how many people, like me, had drifted from their faith, not outright rejecting God, but living with a lukewarm belief that didn't reflect true devotion. I realized how easy it was to fall into that trap, to let the busyness of life take priority over the one thing that truly matters. Jesus' words were clear. Belief is not enough. What I desire is your heart. I couldn't stop thinking about the people I had seen in that desolate place, the ones who had known him but chosen to live apart from him. Their faces were etched with regret, longing for the presence of God they could no longer feel. They weren't there because God had abandoned them. They were there because of the choices they had made, the small compromises that had slowly pulled them away from him. I remembered how Jesus had shown me my own life, moments where I had chosen convenience over conviction, where I had ignored his voice calling me back to him. Those moments seemed insignificant at the time, but standing before him, I saw how they added up, shaping the trajectory of my soul. I felt both humbled and grateful, knowing that he had given me another chance to turn back to him and to help others do the same. In the days that followed, as I recovered from the heart attack, I began to reflect on what it truly meant to follow Jesus. It wasn't about being perfect or checking off a list of religious duties. It was about living with intention, making him the center of every decision, and choosing to reflect his love in every interaction. I realized that every choice mattered, no matter how small. A kind word, a moment of prayer, a decision to forgive. All of these were steps toward living a life fully devoted to him. But it wasn't just about my own faith. Jesus had made it clear that I had a responsibility to share what I had seen. Many are spiritually asleep, just as you were, he had said. Help them wake up before it is too late. At first, the idea terrified me. How could I tell people about this? Would they even believe me? But then I remembered his final words to me. You still have time. Those words gave me courage. This wasn't about convincing people. It was about planting seeds, sharing the truth, and trusting God to do the rest. I began by sharing my story with my husband, Mark. One evening, as we sat together in the quiet of our living room, I told him everything. The heart attack, the vision, the meeting with Jesus, and the message he had given me. Mark listened intently, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and concern. When I finished, he didn't say anything at first. Then he took my hand and said, "Laura, I believe you, and I think you're right. This is something people need to hear." His support gave me the strength to keep going. Next, I shared my experience with a close friend from church. She had known me for years and was one of the few people I felt comfortable opening up to. As I told her about the vision, tears welled up in her eyes. "Laura," she said, "this is exactly what I needed to hear. I've been struggling with my own faith lately, feeling disconnected from God. But hearing your story, it's like he's speaking directly to me." That moment reaffirmed what Jesus had shown me. Even one person's story could make a difference. Of course, not everyone responded the same way. Some people listened politely but seemed skeptical, while others dismissed it entirely. "It sounds like a dream," one coworker said. "Maybe your brain was just processing the trauma." Their doubts stung, but I reminded myself of Jesus' words. "It is not your job to convince, it is your job to share." That became my anchor. a reminder that I wasn't responsible for how people reacted. My only responsibility was to be faithful to the message. As I continued to share my story, I began to notice changes in my own life. My prayers became more intentional, filled with gratitude and a renewed sense of purpose. I started prioritizing time with my family, putting aside distractions to focus on what truly mattered. I reconnected with my church community, finding support and encouragement from others who were also striving to live out their faith. And though I still faced challenges and doubts, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. One night, as I sat by the window, watching the stars, I thought about the people I had seen in the vision, the ones wandering in separation. I realized that their fate wasn't sealed by one grand decision, but by a series of small, seemingly insignificant choices. That thought filled me with both urgency and hope. Every choice we make, no matter how small, has the power to draw us closer to God or pull us further away. And while we can't change the past, we can always choose differently in the present. The message Jesus gave me wasn't just for me, it was for everyone. It was a reminder that lukewarm faith is dangerous, that small compromises can have eternal consequences, and that it's never too late to turn back to Him. Jesus doesn't condemn you, I tell people now, but He doesn't accept half-truths either. He's calling you to live fully for Him before it's too late. Returning to my daily life after the heart attack and the vision was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. Physically, I was healing, but emotionally and spiritually, I felt like a different person. I couldn't go back to living the way I had before, not after what Jesus had shown me. But I also didn't know how to begin sharing my story or how to live out the message I had been given in a world that seemed so focused on everything but faith. The first challenge was facing my own feelings of inadequacy. How could I, someone who had spent years neglecting my faith, suddenly become a voice for Jesus' message? I felt unworthy, overwhelmed by the responsibility of what He had asked me to do. But as I prayed and reflected on His words, I realized that my imperfections didn't disqualify me. They made His grace even more evident. Jesus didn't call me because I was perfect. He called me because I was willing. The next challenge was sharing my story with others. I started with my family, sitting down with my husband and children to explain what had happened. Mark was supportive, as always, but explaining it to Emma and Jacob was harder. They were old enough to understand the gravity of what I was saying, but I wasn't sure how much they believed. "Mom," Emma said, her eyes wide, "does this mean we need to go to church more?" I smiled and said, "It means we all need to think about how we're living and whether we're putting God at the center of our lives." It was a simple answer, but it felt like the right place to start. Sharing my story beyond my family brought its own set of challenges. Some friends listened with an open heart, while others were skeptical. "It sounds intense," one friend said, her tone cautious. "But are you sure it wasn't just a dream? Maybe it was the stress or the medication?" Those comments stung, but I reminded myself of Jesus' words. "It is not your job to convince, it is your job to share." I couldn't control how others reacted. All I could do was plant the seeds and trust God to water them. There were also moments of unexpected encouragement. A coworker who had overheard me talking about my experience pulled me aside one day. "Laura," she said, "I've been feeling so lost lately, like I'm just going through the motions. Hearing your story made me realize I need to reconnect with my faith. Thank you for sharing it." That moment reminded me why I had been given this message. It wasn't about convincing everyone or having all the answers. It was about reaching those who were ready to hear it. As I continued to navigate this new chapter of my life, I also faced challenges within myself. Old habits die hard, and there were days when I felt tempted to fall back into the routine of busyness and distraction. But every time I felt myself slipping, I thought about the vision, the wandering souls, the separation, and Jesus' call to live fully for Him. Those memories kept me grounded, reminding me of what truly mattered. I also began to see changes in my priorities. I started volunteering at my church, helping with outreach programs and connecting with others who were seeking to deepen their faith. I made time for prayer and Bible study, not as a chore, but as a way to stay connected to God. And perhaps most importantly, I started being more intentional in my relationships, with my family, my friends, and even strangers. Every interaction became an opportunity to reflect the love and grace Jesus had shown me. One of the hardest but most rewarding changes was learning to let go of control. Before my heart attack, I had spent so much of my life trying to manage everything: my work, my family, my future. But standing in Jesus' presence had taught me a powerful lesson. I didn't have to carry the weight of it all on my own. I could trust Him to guide me, even when the path wasn't clear. As I look back now, I see that the challenges I faced after my experience weren't obstacles. They were opportunities. Opportunities to grow, to trust, and to live out the message Jesus had given me. And while the journey hasn't been easy, it has been worth it. Because every step I take toward Him brings me closer to the life I was created to live. As I sit here today, reflecting on everything that has happened, I realize that my experience wasn't just a wake-up call for me. It was a message for all of us. Jesus didn't show me that vision to condemn me or to frighten me. He showed it to me because He loves us and wants us to return to Him before it's too late. The separation I saw wasn't a punishment. It was the natural result of a life lived apart from God. And the beauty of His grace is that it's never too late to turn back. For so long, I thought being a good person was enough. I thought as long as I believed in God and didn't do anything bad, I was fine. But standing in His presence, I saw how wrong I had been. Faith isn't about ticking boxes or living a lukewarm life. It's about fully surrendering to Him, trusting Him, and letting His light shine through us in everything we do. It's about living with intention, knowing that every choice we make carries eternal weight. The vision of those wandering souls still stays with me. I think about how many people, like me, have allowed their faith to become lukewarm, letting the distractions of the world pull them away from God. I think about how easy it is to make small compromises, to push Him to the background, and how dangerous that can be. But I also think about the hope Jesus offered me, the reminder that it's never too late to wake up, to choose Him, and to live the life we were created for. Since that day, my life has changed in ways I never could have imagined. I'm not perfect, far from it, but I wake up every day with a renewed sense of purpose. I ask myself, how can I reflect God's love today? How can I make choices that honor Him? And though the journey isn't always easy, I've found a peace and joy that I never had before. I know that some of you may be skeptical about what I've shared. You might think it was a dream, a hallucination, or just the result of a traumatic experience. I understand. I might have thought the same if I hadn't lived it myself. But what I experienced was more real than anything I've ever known. And I believe I was given this message not just for myself, but for you too. So I want to leave you with this question. Are you living fully for God, or have you let your faith become lukewarm? Are you making choices that bring you closer to Him, or are you letting the distractions of the world pull you away? It's not too late to change. Jesus doesn't condemn you, but He does call you to more. He calls you to live with purpose, to trust Him completely, and to let His love transform every part of your life. If my story has touched you, if it's made you reflect on your own life, I encourage you to share it. Share it with someone who might need to hear this message, because we're all on this journey together, and every step we take toward Him brings us closer to the light. The time is now. The choice is yours. What will you do? Thank you for listening to my story. If this message resonated with you, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel for more stories like this one. Together, we can spread a message of hope, faith, and purpose, and help others find their way back to God.